Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 ASFPM Student Paper Competition. My name is Ben Fenley. I am a water resources engineer with HDR out of Bozeman, Montana. And just a couple of housekeeping and announcements before we get started. One, I was told streaming may improve if you shut off any VPNs or additional applications you have open. If you could place any questions you have to our presenters in the Q&A. I can relay that information to them after their presentation. A couple of additional announcements. One, to all the judges, thank you for all of your help in making this process a success. While it is unfortunate we're not meeting in person, I appreciate everyone's involvement and patience in getting this done. Thank you also to Gigi for everything. Greatly appreciated. She is the person behind the scenes that makes this all go round. And then lastly, but definitely not least, congratulations to our 3 finalists. This is a multiple step process, and these 3 students have risen to the top. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Meg Zercher, out of St. Louis University, and she will be presenting Does Predator Presence Affect Stream Hydrology via Trophic Cascades? And with that, Meg.
Hi, my name is Meg Zercher, and thank you for attending my presentation today as a submission in the ASFPM Student Paper Competition. I will be presenting some of my findings on the research I did to better understand how predator presence may affect stream hydrology via trophic cascades. First, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm pursuing a master's in civil engineering with an emphasis on hydraulics and water resources at St. Louis University. That's a photo of me on the right. I moved to St. Louis in January 2018, and it was my birthday shortly after I moved. My partner asked me how I wanted to spend the day, and I decided I wanted to spend it at the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. What I wasn't thinking about at that time is that it ended up being a freezing and snowy day, as it shows in most of my face being covered. I'm very interested in the intersection of engineering and ecology, and my primary and career goal is to integrate sound ecological principles into the field of hydraulic and hydrological engineering to achieve goals that preserve habitat. I was originally interested in looking into this question because over the years, I kept on seeing articles making claims about how the reintroduced wolves in Yellowstone may or may not be affecting river planform and hydrology. As the article on the left shows, some articles claim that the wolves were changing the river's course. Other articles, like the one on the right, claim that this is false. I wanted to better understand where the current state of the research lies between these two extremes. While the research I focused on covered several research sites and rivers, the Yellowstone wolves are a very important case study, so I'd like to give you some background. Wolves were eradicated from Yellowstone and most of their native range by the early 1900s due to systematic trapping, hunting, and poisoning. However, wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in 1995. Populations have stabilized since 2009. The in-park population has approximately 100 animals, fluctuating around that number. Studies have been particularly interested in how wolves' presence may impact willow communities. Scientists have worked to understand how the restored wolf populations may check elf browsing intensity on willow communities and other woody streamside plants that serve to stabilize bank slopes. The reintroduction of the formerly extirpated top predator has provided a unique opportunity to examine removal and recovery impacts of a top predator on stream hydrology. So this takes me to my central question. Does predator presence affect stream hydrology via trophic cascades? This is a very complicated question to research and to answer because there are so many perspectives and variables at play. which includes hydrological, geomorphic, ecological, and biological factors. There are several ways trophic cascades and stream hydrology may be linked. First, what is the connection between apex predator removal and channel morphology via riparian health? Second, would reintroduction of a predator reverse any channel degradation? Does abiotic physical controls always outweigh any effect from trophic cascades? While there is broad and compelling evidence asserting that trophic cascades do result in damage to riparian plant communities, the literature is not in agreement on whether trophic cascades are the primary factor in stream channel degradation and whether reintroduction of the top predator is enough to initiate riparian and stream restoration. In the research I looked into, I found that most studies fell into one of two camps. The first camp emphasized top-down controls like trophic cascades. Here, we can see that predators will act as a check on herbivores, which further acts as a check on riparian vegetation. However, if predators are eliminated, herbivores can overbrowse on riparian vegetation. This may lead to a self-reinforcing feedback loop of a loss of riparian community, which leads to widening channels, which leads to loss of floodplain connectivity, which has drier soil moisture regimes in the overbanks, where dry soil plant communities can outcompete wet soil plant communities, which further leads to loss of more riparian community. The second camp acknowledges that the biological food chain does affect and is affected by stream hydrology, but that stream hydrology is not primarily controlled by it. Bottom-up abiotic physical and hydrological controls are the overwhelming primary control on channel evolution. So in this case, physical controls like stream flows, wood availability, rainfall, and temperature would affect geomorphic evolution, which in turn affects riparian vegetation. Now I'd like to take a closer look at some of the studies that fall into the camp that thinks trophic cascades are the primary factor in stream channel degradation. This study was focused on the Gallatin River in Yellowstone National Park. Hydrological parameters were measured and determined in 3 reaches. One reach, Reach A, seen in the top photo, was outside of elk range, and 2 were within elk range, B and C, shown in the middle and bottom photo. Reach A study scientists determined at 85% willow cover compared to 26 and 5% in B and C. And then Reach A had a 3.1 year average rainfall return period compared to 32.4 and 10.6 in B and C. Rainfall return periods were determined with regional IDF curves. The scientists who wrote this paper concluded that wolves' effects upon elk include direct predation and behaviorally mediated patterns of herbivory, meaning elk may choose to browse differently and less intensely when wolves are present. And this in turn affects channel dynamics. Another study looked at Meadow Creek in Oregon, which was undergoing riparian restoration with the goal to improve fish habitat. Through riparian planting, this project hoped to regulate stream temperatures, attenuate bank flows, reinforce bank stability, and increase floodplain connectivity. Some of these riparian plantings were protected from browsing by a 1.2 high meter fence. Others were left unfenced and therefore vulnerable to browsing. The study found that the fenced, unbrowsed plants had 30% higher survivability, while the browsed plants had 73% lower growth. This led the authors to conclude that wild ungulates can impede riparian restoration needed for channel evolution. Yet another study looked at how cougar presence, or lack thereof, in Zion National Park may affect streams. In Zion, cougars are common in some parts of the park and rare in others. Cougars can predate mule deer, and the primary riparian vegetation is dominated by cottonwood. Scientists took channel measurements on North Creek, where cougars are common and therefore able to predate mule deer, and on the Virgin River, where cougars are rare and mule deer may browse on riparian vegetation unchecked. Scientists found that there was 2.5 times higher erosion levels on the Virgin River stream banks, and that the Virgin River had double the average width-to-depth ratio of North Creek. The researchers attributed this altered channel morphology, such as the bank erosion and higher width-to-depth ratios, to the overgrazing of wild ungulates. The last example of top-down trophic cascade control I'd like to cover was a study conducted in Olympic National Park. Unlike in Yellowstone, where wolves have been reintroduced, wolves have been absent from Olympic National Park since the 1920s. These scientists studied orthophotos of 3 rivers in the context of the wolf-elk trophic cascade. They found channels were getting wider and had 4 times more bare alluvium as wolves became absent, and that palatable trees such as cottonwood and maples, which are tend to get grazed more by elk and mule deer, had populations, density, and age structures decline after wolves were eliminated, as shown in the graphs on the right. Like the studies I cited previously, this led authors to conclude that wild ungulates alter riparian communities, which in turn alters channel morphology. Now that we have taken a look at the top-down literature, I'd like to transition to looking at examples from the literature that exemplify the bottom-up dominated approach. These studies have found evidence that changes in stream channel are due to abiotic bottom-up factors in hydrology, such as increased peak stream flows, snow depths, water table levels, and increased rates of sediment accretion. These studies conclude that the top-down trophic cascades may be correlated with these stream channel changes, but are not causing them. The first study I'd like to look at also studied channel evolution of rivers in Olympic National Park over the past century using the photographic record. They studied channel planform evolution in 4 rivers over a 74-year aerial photographic record. These scientists found that there was significant widening that occurred in all 4 rivers during the 1970s. The 2-year flow magnitude that was calculated with only peak flows used since the 1970s were 10 to 35% greater than the 2-year magnitude that was calculated using the entire gauge record, indicating that flows maybe have increased over the past half century. The study authors also found that peak flows were the strongest predictor of channel width and braiding. They further concluded that any effect elk may have on channel evolution is overwhelmed by, quote, physical forcing and hydrological factors. These scientists do acknowledge that research that I've previously covered in this presentation indicates a trophic cascade effect. The authors posit that the weather conditions in Olympic National Park and wood type and availability may be a significant factor as to why these Olympic National Park rivers appear to not be as controlled by trophic cascades as the studies that found that the Yellowstone National Park rivers may be. So far, the research I've covered has mainly looked at how predator removal may or may not lead to poor riparian plant health and recruitment, but has not made claims as to whether or not predator reintroduction can reverse this damage. This study looked at how ungulate browsing and changing beaver population interplay with Yellowstone's willow recovery over the past 10 years. This study posited that beaver populations were just as important as wolf populations because beavers can raise the water table through damming, which further may help plants recover. So this study left some sites dammed and undammed, and then left some riparian corridors fenced and unfenced to simulate riparian stretches that would have high water tables, low water tables, and varying browsing behavior. This study authors concluded that willow productivity is more heavily controlled by water table depth, and that the 70-year absence of top predators alters the disturbance regime so much that it cannot simply be reversed by reintroduction. The last study I will cover took measurements in the willow stands at Yellowstone National Park to better understand the abiotic factors that most affect their recovery and health. Researchers found that taller willow sites had greater soil moisture, higher water table depths, cooler soil temperatures in the growing season, and warmer soil temperatures in the winter, deeper snowpack and snow water equivalent, and higher nutrient cycling than short willow sites. They concluded that these abiotic factors interact with trophic cascades, but are the primary factors controlling the varying willow recovery throughout Yellowstone National Park. Perhaps some of the disagreement in the research can be explained by the lack of rigorous examination of alternative hypotheses. In some papers, such as the example I show on the right, alternative hypotheses were put forth but were dismissed due to observations or rationale, but not necessarily measurements. This may be an issue because, as one researcher points out, some of the studies emphasizing a top-down explanation for the reported willow recovery in Yellowstone are based on measurements that did not have the power to detect the influence of abiotic factors on plant productivity. In particular, this author calls out the effect that water table depth may play. Methodology differences may also play an important role in the conclusions studies make. As I explained at the introduction, these are highly complex systems, and there are many variables interplaying. Here are a few examples of studies I looked at that studied same or similar variables at the same or similar sites, but have different methodologies that may have affected conclusions. For example, some of the studies at Olympic National Park made conclusions, but had methodology that was based on temporal differences, and some were based on spatial differences. Other studies that looked at plant recovery, in particular willow recovery, randomly selected trees in randomly selected tree stands, while others took measurements on the 5 tallest trees in randomly selected stands. Other studies that looked at elk distribution looked at its effect based on population and then some on population density. While I don't think there's a clear correct answer in the literature at this point, I do think that there are some areas that future research should particularly focus on. Future research needs to check thoroughly for multivariate factors and have a more thorough examination of alternative hypotheses that involve different measurements. Additionally, the majority of the studies I looked at took place in Western North America, and it would certainly be interesting to see more studies in different parts of North America, as well as internationally. In conclusion, this was a complicated question that involves several different disciplines. Research falls into 2 camps primarily. These camps say that stream evolution is predominantly controlled by 1, top-down trophic cascades, or 2, bottom-up physical factors. Unfortunately, there's only one prominent example in the literature of how restoration of a top predator may or may not affect stream hydrology, which makes it difficult to judge the answer. At this point in time, the evidence suggests bottom-up factors may play a larger role more uniformly than top-down factors in most study sites. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation and turn it back over to the moderator. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback after this, please feel free to email me at the address on the screen. That's margaret.zurcher, Z-U-E-R-C-H-E-R, at slu.edu. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Great presentation, Meg. And now we can slide right into our Q&A. I am joined by our author, Meg Zurcher, out of St. Louis University. Hi, Meg.
Hey, Ben, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. I just want to point out that I actually live in your study area. And so if you ever, I advise you to come out and check it out in the field for yourself.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But I just want to open it up into questions. If you have any questions, please chat them now. Our first question is from Jose. Jose asks, do you think there are insights into stream function by looking into mycologic communities?
Yeah, I wish I had more specific information or a better answer. I don't have any knowledge about how they are not connected, but if anything, this research has taught me that when it comes to stream hydrology, particularly in these wild areas, you can find a way to link everything. So I certainly think it'd probably be valid. I just don't have very much information to give about it.
Okay. Next, Mark asks, it's his impression that the data supports the causal relationships, but there's not a way to quantitatively predict the outcome of reintroduction predators. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the studies I highlighted in this presentation kind of really dug into that question, where you can say that disturbing the ecological regime by removing a predator will lead to consequences, and that's pretty borne out in the literature. But that simply reintroducing something can lead to like a linear path back to where it was, and that's not a realistic expectation or something that would happen. That too many shifts and hydrological and ecological shifts have happened in the decades since predator removal to say that you can quantify, or that it is like going to be linearly reversed. I would say probably with careful methodology and really careful controlling statistics for like multivariate factors, you might be able to, you could probably quantify what's going on between predator reintroduction and hydrological changes. But I think that might also bear out that you're going to see that the effect of predator reintroduction is overwhelmed by other factors, if it is indeed like quantitatively borne out.
So our next question is from Anna Zimmerman. Are beavers in danger of losing willow plants with rising temperatures and climate change?
Oh, that's a really great question. I didn't cover that specifically in my research, but I'd imagine so. I'd also imagine probably in like disturbed hydrological regimes that it'd be their habitats more and more affected. But I can certainly see that. I know many animals are having to gradually shift their range north and more north to deal with rising temperatures. So I think that's really an interesting question.
Mark has a question that dovetails into that one. Beaver populations are not tied to natural predators, but instead due to the ultimate predator, humans. Is there a need to research beaver reintroduction?
Certainly. I think that going back to that one study I just cited to Mark's previous question about how predator reintroduction may affect hydrological regimes. I think that that study found really compelling evidence that through damming, the water table is kind of artificially is not the right word, but it's raised in a way that it wouldn't be without damming, obviously, and that the riparian plants, particularly the willows, respond very strongly to that. Like it helped a lot of the willows at their study sites surpass what they termed as the recovery threshold, where basically they were out of browsing range and probably had a better shot at a long productive life. So I would say that the evidence in these sites that particularly looked at the effect beavers may have show that they are just as important, if not more important, than the predators that the studies were looking at, and that the studies that didn't particularly look at them, where beavers probably would have been part of the native range, could probably have benefited from researching them as like a multivariate factor or alternative hypothesis. So I would definitely agree with that sentiment.
So then Derek has a question here. You showed 3 streams with different amounts of elk activity and postulated that elk populations affected the overbank flow amounts. Did you look into the general hydrology to see if overbank flows were just a function of the hydrology and channel capacity?
Yeah, so I think that's referring to one of the Yellowstone studies that was saying that trophic cascades are a controlling factor. And yeah, it's funny because I went back to that study just today because I remember thinking those bank flow return periods seemed, I just wanted to see how they got them again. And so this reach A was outside of elk range, and it was, I guess you would say, like hydrologically healthier, but the reach B and C had some really high bank flow return periods, indicating that they're kind of disconnected from their floodplain. But when you look back at the individual data, it was much more of like a range. So that could be, I think that was just as much of a product as like the average return period really skewing the return period peak flow relationship. So I think I think that kind of bears out that with limited data in one study, that maybe it deserves a second look, or basically in those reaches that we're looking at where elk browsed, they perhaps you should take it with a grain of salt, just because there are these other factors and the data is kind of really had a broad distribution.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. Were stream velocity / volumes normalized between the Virgin River and North Creek in the study?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that one of the main factors they were looking at was a width to depth ratio. And that in and itself, would that kind of be normalized in and of itself as a ratio? But no, to answer that question, I'm not quite sure, but it wasn't highlighted if it was.
Okay. Well, thanks, Meg. I appreciate it. There are plenty of comments here commending you on your presentation, so I think you can feel pretty good about that.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, everyone.
Our next presentation is brought to us by Hannah Spiro out of Boise State University. Hannah is presenting modeling the downstream consequences of the 1976 Teton Dam failure and resulting flood by validating the GeoClaw software with historical data. Hannah?
Hi, I'm Hannah Spiro, and I'm a senior undergraduate at Boise State University, and I'm also a student researcher. I am researching how modeling the Teton Dam failure for downstream consequences can validate the GeoClaw code using geophysical techniques. I would first like to thank my research mentor, Dr. Donna Calhoun, and also my collaborators, the Bureau of Reclamation and the BSU HCRI, or Hazards and Climate Resilience Institute. I would also like to thank the Association of State Floodplain Managers for this opportunity to present my research. Here is an overview of the talk I am excited to share with you. I will discuss my motivations, background information, results, my methods, a discussion of the agreement of my model with historical records and also future work. And I will also be talking about a research component that focuses on outreach and community resilience. So to begin with, imagine you are in eastern Idaho. It's 1976, it's June 5th, it's a Saturday, and it's 10:45 a.m. and nothing is amiss. Upstream, however, there is chaos. Water is breaking through the Teton Dam that has only been fully filled a week, but was not supposed to be fully filled until it hit a year. The manager on the site has sent 3 bulldozers to fill the leaking portion with gravel, but at 11:20 a.m. the leak is widening into a flow, and 2 of the 3 bulldozers are swept up and they flow downstream. 10 minutes later, it's 11:30 a.m. and the dam is spurting water, and at 11:55 a.m. the dam crest breaches on the northern side and the Teton Dam fails. My motivations to numerically model the Teton Dam failure's flood are demonstrated by the physical system importance. First, there are dams located worldwide and millions of lives are at risk from a dam failure. In the U.S. map below, every red dot is a dam in the United States. Now in the map on the right, the Association of Dam Safety has plotted all dam failures before 2016 that occurred in the U.S. The Teton Dam is here. With all of these failures, improved monitoring and flood management is necessary. Second, with numerically modeling dam failures, this is a low-cost and effective method as opposed to other methods, potentially like tracer dye tests. The software I'm using for this task, GeoClaw, it has been implemented into tsunami modeling, which is at the right with time lapses overlaid, demonstrating a low-cost approach. Third, numerically modeling these geohazards is a critical step to improving community preparation and resilience. A present-day example of where numerical modeling could have been used to improve evacuation plans happened just 2 weeks ago on May 20th. 2 dams failed in Michigan, and thousands had to evacuate, and they were under 9 feet of water. Here's an image of one of those dams, the Edenville Dam. So not only is dam failure modeling critical, but it also should be implemented more broadly, because it's not about if the dams are going to fail, but when. So, when setting out to model the Teton Dam failure, I set several research objectives for this study. First, I wanted to use the 2D shallow water wave equations to model the Teton Dam failure with an evolving free boundary and free surface which is embedded into a Cartesian mesh. Second, I wanted to run a high-resolution simulation using dynamically evolving meshes to model the resulting flood front and also for the full flood duration, which is 23 hours. Third, for model validation, I wanted to install numerical gauges for easy comparison between the historical values of the data and my current model inundation depths. I wanted to accurately model the historic reservoir volume, which we will touch on later, and also model the initial dam break. And finally, I wanted to combine geophysical and geological methods with numerical modeling to ensure model validity. So now that you know what my research objectives were and the motivations behind my research, let's cover some critical background information of the Teton Dam failure. First, where is the Teton Dam? Well, it is located in eastern Idaho, which is to the right in the graphic, and you can also see where the state of Idaho is in the United States. On the left-hand side, you can see the Teton Dam Reservoir in early 1976 before it failed, with a crest height of 330 feet. The portion of the dam that failed is the left third. Second, here is a table from the Association of Dam Safety focusing on the Teton Dam failure. There are 3 facts here that I used when parameterizing my model. First, I focused on the dam height, which is an average of 305 feet. Second, I focused on the loss of life, which was 11 people. And third, I focused on the percent of loss of life to where their lives were lost. In the first 7 miles, 6 people drowned. This was a terrible dam failure. You can only imagine what would have happened had the dam failed overnight instead of mid-morning. Third, there was previous work I'd like to acknowledge conducted by Boise State University and the Idaho National Laboratories, where they used GeoClaw for a general Teton Dam failure model, which you can see on the left, and on the right, they focused on nuclear reactors and how they would be flood inundated The model that they were using on the right is neutrino model, and you can see a link to it at the bottom if you'd like to investigate it further. With that background information, I will now walk you through my methods. The first phase of my research involves discussing why Teton Dam was used as a case study, which is its proximity to Boise State, which is very, very close. It's just 5 hours away, and also discussing why I used the GeoClaw software. Up until this point, you have heard me mention it several times. I will now walk you through why I'm using it. GeoClaw software, if this were a baseball game, is the utility player of the team. It has many different applications, and it always has a strong offense, so it hits many home runs when you're using it for modeling. To begin with, GeoClaw has been used and benchmarked for tsunami modeling. It has been used in the Himalayas to study geomorphology and outburst flooding scenarios. GeoClaw has adaptive mesh refinement capabilities, so it is computationally time efficient and high resolution where you want it to be. Currently, GeoClaw is being used by the USGS to model debris flows. So because of the utility of GeoClaw and the validation for these other geohazards, I'm using it to model the Teton Dam failure. Phase 1 of my research consisted of modeling the Teton Dam failure in GeoClaw, using AMR to define gridding mechanisms, and therefore resolve local inundation. Phase 1 also consisted of resolving the local inundation through inserting numerical gauges and the evolving wet-dry front being tracked. Furthermore, it was critical to run on R2, which is a BSU supercomputer cluster, as these simulations were large. Another advantage of GeoClaw was the implementation of the numerical gauges into the simulation, which determines the overall inundation of the area. This table from my paper shows 7 gauges. On the left, their associated plotting gauge number and their locations. Then, in the lighter gray, these are historical values from the Bureau of Reclamation, illustrating the flooding depth, arrival time, and in general how far that location is from the dam at that time. Today I will be showing you the updated plots of 4 of these gauges. Phase 2 will occur later this fall. Given the pandemic, we were unable to complete the geophysical field expedition in the spring or in the summer of 2020. However, this section of my methods will focus on using drone photogrammetry and structure from motion to generate high-resolution topography to better characterize the initial dam failure. And additionally, it can be used to produce outreach animation modeling and to collect ground reconnaissance data, which will generate a DSM or a digital surface model. By using structure for motion, I will be able to improve the resolution of the topography from 10 meters to 1 meter, which in turn can improve the modeling of the initial dam break. I will also be able to integrate high-resolution topography into GeoClaw from this, which has never been done before, so it's cutting edge. My third goal using structure from motion is I will be able to institute a variable Manning's roughness coefficient into the simulation, which will allow me to model the flood better. This table shows 3 different mediums and their calculated Manning's roughness coefficients, or their Manning's N. As you can see, they're significantly different. One of the fluid velocity equations that are instituted that are used in GeoClaw is to the right. You can see the denominator is the Manning's coefficient. Here, additionally, are the definitions of the variable. With plugging the same values in for everything but the N variable and substituting the values from above for concrete, rangeland, and the developed low intensity, Manning's roughness coefficient, we can calculate different fluid velocities. Here's concretes, here's the rangelands, and here is the low intensity development. With how different these values are, phase 2 is critical to refining the model by instituting the surface roughness. This will affect the alignment of the current model with the historical data as well. Another part of my methods pertain to calculating the volume of the reservoir. As you can see in this Google Earth snapshot, there are yellow outlined polygons, emphasized by these arrows. Calculating the volume of water ensured that the GeoClaw simulation was using the correct volume of water and the outflow would be similar to that of historical data. For my calculations, I determined that the GeoClaw average volume was 284,750 acre-feet, which is very close to the historic value of 288,250 acre-feet. With those methods, I have progressed through phase 1 of modeling the Teton Dam failure, and I will be showing you my results over the next few slides. The results I will be showing you today are from the Teton Canyon Mouth Gauge, the Wilford Gauge, the Sugar City gauge, and the Rexburg gauge. Also, when you are looking at the geoclaw simulations overlying the Google Earth, the boundaries of the historic flood have been implemented in the red outlined polygon, and this follows the Historic Bureau of Reclamation outline of the flood. Here is where Rexburg is on both of the maps. To begin with, the Teton Dam Canyon Mouth gauge was the furthest upstream, and we will work our way downstream. This gauge showed flood waves that were over 30 feet high in the model and immediate flood inundation occurring at 12 p.m. This gauge demonstrated historical agreement with waves that were close to 40 feet in depth as the flood broke out of the canyon at 12:10 p.m. We consider this to be excellent agreement. The next gauge downstream is the Wilford gauge. This is where 3 people perished. Historically, the flood arrived here at 12:45 p.m. with inundation depths of around 15 feet. In the geoclaw simulation, the gauge largely agreed with the historical values, displaying a depth of around 15 feet. The model showed the flood waves reaching the town at approximately 1 p.m., which agrees with the 12:45 p.m. arrival time. Next, moving further and further downstream, the Sugar City gauge showed the floodwaters arriving at 1:20 p.m., which is general agreement to the historical literature value of 1:30 p.m. arrival. Furthermore, the depth as displayed on the left in the gauge is around 10 feet, which is close to the value of 15 feet, although slightly lower. The final gauge I will be showing you today is the Rexburg gauge, which also demonstrated inundation agreements with a model value of 6 feet as opposed to the historical depths of between 6 and 8 feet. The model registers the flood at around 2:30 p.m. with model grid refinement beginning at 1:15 p.m., which is shown by the topography or the green line in the figure. Therefore, this gauge agrees with historical data and flood water levels. It also is interesting to interpret the gauge on the left, where in my opinion there seems to be a second wave hitting Rexburg around 7 p.m. So the results found that the dam model needs to be refined more to accurately capture the initial dam burst better. However, largely across all 7 gauges, the inundation levels were found to match historical records and geographic spread, both being compelling indicators that the geoclaw software can be adapted for dam simulations. Additionally, the geoclaw model had high water marks that were in good agreement with the historical boundary surveyed at the time of the Teton Dam flood. For instance, the Wilford gauge demonstrated floodwaters reaching the gauge around 15 minutes and aligning with the flood boundary. With the numerical fidelity of this model, we consider this to be excellent agreement. So, with the application of Phase 2 occurring later this year in the fall, there will be higher resolution of the dam failure to more accurately model the initial burst, and we will be able to validate the geoclaw code. With that validation, we will be able to conduct future dam modeling and create flood maps for local communities. We will also be able to communicate threats to lawmakers in visually impactful ways, and we will be able to aid in the design and the location of future dams. For instance, risk management of dam safety nationwide could implement numerical modeling within their process. Or, for downstream inundation, the dam sector could estimate economic consequences using numerical models of dam failure scenarios. This model could also provide a general loss of life dam failure scenario application from the general modeling simulation. And finally, from the federal level with the U.S. Congress to the local level, adapted geoclaw numerical models or numerical models in general could reach these lawmakers so we would be able to build a more prepared and resilient population with improved funding. Another important but often overlooked aspect of research is the communication of that research to others. I consider outreach, education, and community resilience to be an important part in improving citizen science fluency, and there are 3 main ways I'm working on solving this problem. First, I partnered with the Hazards and Climate Resiliency Institute of Boise State and the Society of Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration to host a talk from Brent Carter, who worked for the Bureau of Reclamation at the time of the Teton Dam failure. Second, I am the president of the Boise State Geosciences Club, and I am organizing a workshop for undergraduates in the Department of Geosciences and the Department of Engineering to go to the Teton Dam failure site and to learn from 2 Boise State instructors and also from industry professionals with the Bureau of Reclamation. This demonstrates a partnership between all forms of academia industry professionals, and also multiple departments. And finally, I'm most excited about this outreach tool. I will be working to produce a 3-part film series. I'm hoping to release it in August if everything pans out with the pandemic. And this 3-part film series will focus on the importance of STEM education and can be used as a tool in K through 12 curriculum when they're learning about geohazards, flood inundation hazards, and dam failures. The film also will have the capacity to be used for citizen science fluency in Idaho. I also would like to thank the Museum of Rexburg and East Idaho News, both of whom are going to be collaborating with me on this project. I'm excited to share a short clip from the intro of it with you now. It's a 2-minute clip. Hi, I'm Hannah Spiro, and I'm an undergraduate student researcher at Boise State University, and I'm in the Department of the Geosciences, and I do interdisciplinary research, where I'm combining engineering, geophysics, and also mathematics. My research mentor, Dr. Donna Calhoun, she's in the mathematics department.
Water is coming through on the north side of the dam on the downstream side, and it's getting us more and more and more mud, dirt, water, and that whole downstream face on the north side of the dam is completely caving in. Now there's going to be a lot of water come down the Teton River. As a matter of fact, it's coming down now. An awful lot of water is going to be coming down that Teton River. My advice, I haven't talked to police yet or girl people here, I'm going to in a minute, but my advice to people downstream that are living along the Teton River, to get your belongings. To get your belongings. So look, Lisa, look, that goes the whole side. That goes the whole complete side of the north edge of the Teton Dam.
This dam failure and the resulting flood occurred in our backyard. From Boise, it's a 5-hour drive to the area where the flood hit, and it flooded over 70 miles downstream, and there were communities and cattle and people's livelihoods and their lives. All of these things were affected. I don't know how someone couldn't be passionate and want to research dam failures and adapt a software like GeoClaw to solve these problems and improve current mitigation and current planning to improve community resiliency and to help save lives. These are the factors that initially drew me to this research and still drive my passion to understand this research problem better. That concludes my presentation. I would like to thank my research mentor, Dr. Donna Calhoun in the Boise State Mathematics Department. I would like to thank Dr. Brittany Brand with the Hazards and Climate Resilience Institute. I would like to thank Dr. David Wilkins, who I consulted regarding geomorphology, Dr. Alejo Flores, who I consulted via the drone photogrammetry. I'd like to thank my late grandpa, Papa Mike Spiro, who was a professional engineer and initially got me excited about science and engineering. And I'd like to thank my parents, Michael and Melissa Spiro, who support me always. I would like to also thank the Association of State Floodplain Managers one more time for this opportunity to share my research and to hopefully improve community resilience and inform people of the capabilities of numerically modeling geohazards. These are my sources. With that, I thank you for your time, and I now welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. And now welcome to our Q&A. Again, I invite those with questions to type them in the chat on the right of your screen. Hannah, I'm going through the questions now, and it looks like the first one is from Mark, and he asked, does GeoClaw include the term for inertia? The amount of super elevation in the upper reach was really substantial. Does it capture super elevation recorded?
Yes, that's a really good question. Although I'm not as familiar with that terminology of the super elevation and inertia, referring to the gauge data, I found that it was resolving the 40 feet of inundation well, and it was accurately modeling the depth. So I'm unsure if that fully answers the question, and I can definitely delve into that terminology more, but that would be my answer to that question.
Kind of dovetailing into that, why did you choose GeoClaw over some of the other modeling platforms such as SRH2D or HEC-RAS?
Well, after attending this conference, I'm finding that there's definitely pros to using both of the other softwares as well that I knew little about actually when I was going into this project. However, previously I've done some tsunami modeling over in Puget Sound of Washington. And so I had the background knowledge of GeoClaw and I'm just an undergraduate, so I'm still learning a lot about these different softwares. And then when I moved to Boise State University, Dr. Donna Calhoun has a specialty using GeoClaw. So that's primarily why I chose it, but it also does have advantages over HEC-RAS and the SRH2D, such as different adaptive mesh refining capabilities with coarsening grids and computational efficiencies.
So I'm just curious, in your research, did you do any comparison of your results with those previous research topics or projects performed by HEC-RAS or any other modeling platforms?
I haven't found any previous research that was conducted of the Teton Dam failure besides the Boise State and the INL initial research, which was back in, I think the early like 2007 to 2011 era. But besides that, which was a rough model, I haven't found a historic model of it. However, I'm in touch with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we're actively working on my model together so we can compare it for the downstream consequences portion with other kinds of models that they use, like SRH.
Great. Harold has a question. How sensitive is the model to the accuracy of your digital terrain model? For larger watersheds, such as that of the Teton, how high quality DTMs may not be available?
That's definitely a good question. So I'm modeling the Teton Dam break, and that's going down 17 miles. So this is a fairly large inundation area. I've been able to find, and my research mentor, Dr. Donna Calhoun, we found 10-meter resolution, which is fairly good. And we're hoping to increase the resolution of the initial dam base up to 5 meters using the structure for motion drone photogrammetry technique. And if there are areas that we could resolve further, such as the Teton River when it was inundated, we can also use the drone photogrammetry in that area, and that's not as expensive as running a LiDAR campaign, which potentially could be, that would be helpful, but in the large scheme of things, we're using drone photogrammetry to get the high resolution topography for those areas.
I have a follow-up question regarding GeoClaw. As a fellow modeler, I'm curious how the physical breach process was simulated in GeoClaw.
That's a good question. So GeoClaw originally was created for tsunami modeling, and dam failure is quite different from that application with the initial break. So how it's modeled is currently there's a pixel which is holding back the dam, and then the initial simulation, it would be awesome if I could show you guys the animation right now. But initially the pixel breaks at time 0, and then it time steps through the adaptive modeling campaign. And so ideally, what we're hoping to do is work more on the initial failure. So it's not one pixel breaking and all the flood water is breaking out at one time, but it will be more of a gradual failure and just on the left or the northern third of the dam. And so we are finding our results align pretty well with historical data right now, but I think with advancing GeoClaw and the current model in that aspect, that we will definitely be more competitive with HEC-RAS or SRH2D.
Great, thanks, Anna. Again, very, very nice job. Well done, and a very appropriate topic for some of the current events in our country, as you mentioned. So
definitely,
thanks again. Now for our third presentation, Mahasweta Chakraborty out of Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. She'll be presenting Dealing with the Deluge of Waste, Flood Waste Management in a Two-Tier City of India. Mahasweta?
Hello everyone, I am Mahasweta, one of the semi-finalists at the Association for State Floodplain Managers Student Paper Competition 2020. I have pursued Water Policy and Governance from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, one of the leading social science institutes of Asia. Today, the world is fighting with COVID-19, and I am sure mankind will overcome this tussle and emerge to become stronger than ever. But amidst the pandemic, we should not ignore other persistent issues of climate change like flood. In India, the monsoons are about to arrive, and so are floods and its associated problems. I am glad to present my paper dealing with the deluge of waste, flood waste management in a two-tier city of India under the guidance of Dr. Pratibha Ganeshan. The field site for this research is Jalpaiguri, a small town in India, which is vulnerable to flooding due to its location and river course shifting. This is a map of India, and West Bengal state is located here. Within the state, this is Jalpaiguri district, and this is Jalpaiguri town. Himalayas are located here, and West Bengal's Jalpaiguri is situated just at the foothills of Himalayas. So why I took up this topic? By 2030, 10 million people will be at the risk of flooding. The obvious solution is to build flood resilience, but it increasingly seems that due to climate change, the disasters have become more frequent. Adding to disaster management, limited capacity of developing countries to manage waste enhances the vulnerability of people belonging to poor socioeconomic backgrounds. Prioritization of vulnerable areas and the needs that require action at the earliest can be done on the basis of my findings, and this can eventually translate into schemes and policies at local, state, national, and international levels. This study could facilitate a better understanding among the local bodies, NGOs, CSRs who work during floods but fail to realize the need to deal with flood waste separately. Additionally, the overall information gathered from field would add value to the huge amount of existing literature in disaster management and solid waste management, as flood waste requires a separate section in every national disaster management policy. Now, a brief introduction to the topic. The third most potential loss from a disaster after human and economic loss is the physical damage out of infrastructures, trees, and buildings, which produce a humongous amount of waste. Flood results in concoction of all kinds of solid waste, including infrastructure, household, organic, plastic, hazardous, and liquid waste, including pesticide runoff, human sewage, and oil leakages. In most cases, flood waste sets down more burden on communities who are already struggling to cope with the catastrophe. Urban local bodies in India grapple with the humongous task of managing the huge amount of waste produced post flood, and the deteriorating environmental quality affects the health of local people, which becomes a gnawing concern. Overall, flooding disrupts the normal functioning of an urban system. In developing countries like India, where the solid and liquid waste management is already in a sorry state, flood waste can have several negative implications on the health of the people. Having reviewed several literature and frameworks on disaster waste management, I found out that there is a gap in understanding the problem of flood waste. Flood results in mixing of waste and subsequently increases the volume of wet waste, which is not easily processable. Yet, academicians have failed to examine this aspect of the waste management. Similarly, the frameworks of flood waste management, like United Nations Disaster Waste Management Framework and Bangkok Flood Waste Management Framework, have mentioned technical solutions but fail to address the socio-economic dimensions of flood waste, which will be addressed through my study. So my objectives are to study the solid waste management during normal conditions and during floods in Jalpaiguri town, to examine the strategies adopted by local bodies to deal with the issue of solid waste after flood in Jalpaiguri, and finally to document the various socio-economic dimensions of flood waste. Methodology. Ontologically, the study is exploratory and qualitative in nature. The tools of data collections were non-participant observation, in-depth semi-structured interviews, photographs, and focus group discussions. Theoretical framework. A theoretical framework embraces all the concepts and overarches the study to broader themes of research. In my study, I have selected Bangkok Flood Waste Management Cycle as my theoretical framework. The guidelines give insight into the operationalization of flood waste management. The problem of flood waste management has been duly acknowledged in Bangkok's Guidelines. The waste management in that country takes place in four phases, which is similar to the disaster management cycle. The guideline emphasizes upon operation, command, logistic, finance, planning, and stakeholder involvement in public handling of waste. The guidelines have mentioned the necessary steps to be taken by administration to handle the flood waste in different phases, and the manual can be used by trainers to handle the waste management. But that cycle lacks social inclusion and the problems arising out of it. In India, due to differences in caste, class, and gender, even within the town, there are differences in vulnerability among families and households. More than administration, there is greater involvement of local people in handling the waste, especially in slums. This resulted in varying coping mechanisms within flood waste among various households. This is my framework, the different socioeconomic aspects of flood waste management cycle in Jalpaiguri. These are the various themes which have arisen out of the different phases, which I'll be discussing in the later slides. The first phase is mitigation phase. Mitigation is a process of reducing the impact of disaster from life and property. It is the most important stage as all preparations to reduce the impact of flood waste are taken here. If the mitigation strategies are sustainable, future hazard potential can be greatly reduced. The mitigation strategies are taken by both government and local people. In Jalpaiguri, the mitigation strategies have been limited to engineering measures, like building hydrants, stronger embankments, developing early warning systems, and creation of temporary shelter. During this phase, the waste production is normal, and it is important to adopt a scientific way of waste management. The municipality also invests this time in building time taps and toilets above anticipated flood levels for the local people to use it during floods. Yet, there are issues of water contamination post floods. The first thing is controlling the generation of building waste. In Jalpaiguri, a huge amount of waste is generated from poor households as their houses get demolished due to weak construction material. Yet, over time, the residents have tried to overcome this misfortune. The poor households use tarpaulin sheets and bamboo sticks to cover their houses or raise cemented stairs with the help of bags of silt and sand around their houses. The economically richer population build their houses at higher elevation and get benefits of waste collection, better drainage system, better roads, and are at lesser risk than the slums. Most of the coping strategies during mitigation phase are noticed to be related to the structure of house. This is because houses are the biggest safety net and they make efforts to reduce flood damages, which in turn reduces the flood waste produced post monsoon. Although these coping strategies are very short term in nature, and there is absence of long term adaptation services in Jalpaiguri. Secondly, controlling the generation of electronic items. One of the other lifestyle changes the slum dwellers had to make was invest less on electronic items like televisions, refrigerator, etc. In this way, waste generation is itself reduced. But this results in disinvestment, which is really bad for the economy as a whole. This behavior is mainly prevalent in poor neighborhoods due to their inability to elevate their houses. This is one of the responses at an FGP. Non-structural measures are neither given importance nor encouraged by local authorities. Flood waste management guidelines says that it is a crucial period as the situation is normal. Many non-structural measures like communicating with the stakeholders like local people and local authorities is important. In making a plan, also it is important to collect data and analyze data in the previous flood waste, which will help in preparing for equipment and conducting trainings based on the data. And this period can be utilized for all this kind of work. The next phase is preparedness phase. This is the phase where local people plan on how to respond. The first one is participation and cooperation. Flood bring communities together and they act with a union that is hard to see in a non-flood situation. At times, when the warning system fails or the flood comes unannounced, especially during the night time, people start informing everyone nearby. This point to the rich social networking, which acts as a great asset in times of need. Everyone packs and keeps their valuables safely in cupboards. In this way, the items are safe from turning into a flood waste. The second theme is protection of assets. A proper emergency team is required for operating the whole process of flood waste management. But what misses the attention of stakeholders is that protection of assets are considered to be the responsibility of women. The negative aspects of gender roles and responsibilities and power structures both within the household and community create a bias towards men. There is an absence of decision making power within women to reduce their vulnerabilities. Women are still considered to be the caretakers of the household. Thus, men can save their lives, but women have the burden of carrying important documents and money. There are many studies which show the vulnerabilities of women, but their active contribution in community and household often go unnoticed. At this point of time, residents should get support from local authorities in collecting their important documents and keeping them at a safe place like a locker. An ad hoc flood waste management task force should be prepared during this time based on the flood level. According to Bangkok flood waste management guidelines, meetings with the district officials should be conducted to develop a common understanding of operation, and public relation activities should be started along with early warning systems so that people are better prepared for the disaster. The next phase, during flood phase. During this period, the waste management system is non-functional and yet the waste generation continues. The first thing, vulnerabilities of women. The vulnerabilities of women increase as the disaster management cycle proceeds. The situation is quite similar in the flood waste management cycle. During this time, most of the houses have a general trend that the women of the houses stay back to look after the household, documents, and other valuable items. Here you can see one of the responses. While women and children are considered to be the vulnerable sections of the society, little attention has been paid to their capacities to respond to events or to the drivers of such risk. Staying back increases the risk of mostly women to the risk of snake or rodent bite and other waterborne diseases. The next one is sanitation. Lack of appropriate facilities for sanitation in flood-prone areas is one of the reasons behind environmental and health degradation. During flood, due to absence of toilets, people resort to unhealthy practices like open defecation, using of cloths during menstruation cycles, which are not common in dry season. Groundwater forms the primary source of drinking water, and open defecation can have a direct impact on the quality of water. This results in a number of diseases even post-flood like diarrhea and typhoid. Lack of proper sanitation facilities with poor drinking water and lack of awareness about hygiene can result in waterborne diseases. This shows how one disaster can come out of a previously existing disaster. The last one is after flood phase. This is the stage when floodwater recedes, but the flood waste generation continues, and ideally the full waste collection should take place. Bangkok flood waste management guideline mentioned that the period is to be utilized to transport collected waste and safely dispose of the waste to final disposal sites. Moreover, in this period, the challenges, issues, and practices of flood waste management are reviewed. Coordination with junk buyers is necessary due to the production of new waste from the flood damage. This is also the time of recovering lost items and getting new documents done. The first thing is cleaning of waste. At this stage, the residents return to their houses from flood shelters. They find a humongous amount of waste in their residences. When the local people come back to their house after the nightmare, they have to toil so much to bring back the situation to normal. There's an unbearable stench of human excreta which comes from their homes. Many items become non functional. Local people use sand and silt bags to soak the water, only after which the cleaning can start. They cannot eat or cook in their own house after coming back due to the immense amount of stench. After a flood, there's a huge number of dead rats and fishes which start rotting. Immediately after coming back from flood shelter, the slum dwellers bury those dead rats, fishes, or animals to prevent the spread of any kind of infection. In most of the slum households, the burden of clearing waste fall on women, and sometimes in this way, they miss their daily wages, although the laborious work are done by men. The next one is creation of local dumps. Mostly such local dumps are found in the backyards of slums or near poor neighborhoods. The local dumps consist of mixed waste which cannot be recovered, recycled, or reused. Sometimes the residents also set fire on the local dumps without any scientific treatment. Open burning results in 90% of air pollution, due to which it releases carbon monoxide, carcinogenic hydrocarbons, and particulate matters, twice harmful than the pollution from road transportation of Mumbai, says a report. The next one is dumping ground. Open dumping of solid waste is one of the poorest rendered services provided by municipal corporation as a system applied at unscientific, outdated, and inefficient. Open dumping sites are usually found in the outskirts of a town, and in Jalpaiguri, the landfill site is situated 3 kilometers away from the town. This is the dumping ground, and this is the town. Post monsoon, all the waste from the town collected are dumped here without any scientific treatment. Wet waste produce odor, which is a serious effect on the nearby residents. Finally, conclusion. To implement a successful waste management plan, it is important to have an integrated scientific waste management plan, and the government should invest accordingly. Urban local bodies work in isolation from communities and fail to realize the major problems dealt with the locals, like the need of sanitary napkins and sanitation facilities. But they just go on catering to the basic needs like providing mosquito nets, jaggery, and puffed rice during floods. The next point is, although common but important. Urban environment leads to the quick generation of surface runoff, which gets mixed with liquid and solid waste of the town. The stormwater drains should be constructed in such a way that the floodwater is utilized for recharging the groundwater. The next one is, it is important to acknowledge that rivers and groundwater are common pool resources and should not be used in the benefit of the towns. Like in case of Jalpaiguri, the dumping ground is at a village and the village residents suffered due to the waste produced by the town. Lastly, identification of NGOs who work in the waste sector can take place in Jalpaiguri. They can volunteer to handle, segregate, and clear the waste produced post flood with government intervention instead of sending everything to the landfill. When I went to Jalpaiguri and in many parts of the country, people were really unaware of the topic flood waste. So it is important that academicians and government policies should acknowledge this problem. The government should release more funds for flood relief, which can be utilized for transportation, segregation, and storage of flood waste. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Mahashweta. And again, just a simple reminder, please chat your questions on the side of your screen. And we are joined by our presenter now for a Q&A. Hi, Mahashweta.
Hello.
Can I ask what time it is where you are right now?
It's 3:13 a.m.
So a very big thank you for joining us. I know that's a struggle, I'm sure. But so
No
thank you for
problem.
being with us. And that's a very fascinating topic. It's not something that we as technical professionals think about. So again, it's a very good, you made excellent points.
Thank you.
You touched on many phases in your presentation.
Yes.
In your mind, which is the most important?
Mitigation phase.
And why would that be?
Because there is no waste production at this point of time. So the local authorities can work and bring a better waste management policy. So in India, like in all the places, like 100% waste collection is not taking place. So at this point of time, they can work on this.
Do you have any mitigation recommendations?
Yes, like first of all, the government should start investing and talk about this flood waste. Like it's not even acknowledged in India. Also, the finances are not proper when it comes to flood waste. Like in USA, there are something called National Disaster Debris Management Policy, but India, there is nothing like that. So when the waste management is normal, like in normal conditions, people can come together and make a policy, and also building can be done normally. Like proper structural measures and non-structural measures can be taken at this point of time.
Excellent. So we have another question in our chat. How easy is flooding related information to come by in India?
Can you please repeat the question?
Sure. How easy is flooding related information to come by in India? So how easy is it to find?
It's quite difficult. Like when it comes to technical questions, then you will get data related to it. But socioeconomic data is quite less. Like there's very less study on this. Like even in the world also, I found very less study on this on understanding the socioeconomic conditions, the problem faced by the local people. And when climate change is an issue and flood is happening every time, like 2 weeks back only we had cyclone issue. So there is no policy, like it is considered to be the responsibility of local people on going back. Like there is a place called Sundarbans, so even after 2 weeks they couldn't come back to normal life. So this like flooding data, like people can say like how much is the water level and how many people are affected, but what are the problems and what are the conditions they are going through is not actually talked about.
So we have another question, and that's from Molly. How did you get interested in this topic?
Okay, so I have been suffering from this. Like I have been seeing this problem. Like local people have been toiling so much in coming back to normal life, and I have been one of the victim of this. Recently, we had Amphan cyclone in eastern India. So after that, I thought of taking up this topic and doing a socioeconomic study rather than a quantitative one.
So is it possible to separate the plastic waste before it is burned?
Definitely, it would be really great. But in India, segregation is not taking place. Like even in tier one cities, like I did a tier two study, even in tier one studies, there is no segregation of waste. All the waste directly go to the landfills. Although the policy says segregation, still it is not adopted by the local authorities and also by the local people. So this is a great problem. And when it goes to the landfills, the people living near the landfills, the dumping ground, they are affected very badly. The socioeconomic condition in that area is very bad. Like the groundwater quality in that area is totally affected, and now they have to buy water. So again, an economic cost comes into play. All these are the indirect costs which are not taken into considerations.
What would it require to get everyone to evacuate these flooding areas so they're not at risk?
It is actually very difficult. Like firstly, when it is a flash flood, like my area is affected to flash flood, so it is quite difficult firstly. Secondly, evacuating is possible, but like after they come back to their homes, they will find that everything is demolished. Now they have to like reconstruct their houses. So that is a major problem. Like most of the lives are saved in India, like during floods most of them are saved. Life saving is not an issue, but certain important documents, money, like in India many of them keep their money at their homes. Also there are important documents, ID cards, um, many important documents which are left behind at the home. So all this waste, like this become waste at the end. So saving all these things become very important because many people have very valuable jewelry also at home. So what about this? Like these things are not talked about in policies. So that's why I took up this topic.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Based on the chats, it looks like everybody thinks you had a very wonderful presentation. And again, thank you for getting up so early. I'm sure if we had this conference in person, you'd be getting a round of applause. So thank you again very much, and I'll let you go back to sleep. And with that, that concludes our session. To all the judges, please rank your scores based on the criteria that Gigi and I have previously sent, and I will talk to you all soon. Thank you.